Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to lecture 3. This lecture would be on urban land use planning. So the key concepts covered in this lecture would be land use and land cover, land use classification and structure, town planning guidelines and municipal bylaws. Town planning guidelines and municipal bylaws are considered so that we can also discuss on how this influences integrated land use transportation planning. So coming to land use and land cover, land use refers to the purpose the land serves or the different activities carried out in them, for example, residential, commercial, recreation, etc. But land covers refers to the surface cover on the ground, whether it can be water bodies, it can be natural vegetations, rocks, artificial cover, and artificial cover means built up area, means maybe some built up urban area. And not only that, also changes in that over a period of time. So we not only consider the land use or land cover of an urban area, we also understand the transformation both land use and land cover has gone through over a period of time, and that actually helps us to understand how the city has grown and also helps us to plan for the future. So this also helps us, urban planners, to decide what to retain, where to plan for new development, the kinds of development that should be planned over there, and what to connect, and then what to protect. So that means if you find certain areas as disjointed, that means those has to be connected. If you find certain areas are sensitive, based on the land cover, you can see that, okay, there is forest land cover, and that, there over a period of time it is depleting, so that means that has to be protected. And then when you are talking about where to plan for new development, that means you need, based on your existing land use structure and land cover, you can decide what should be a suitable area for industry or a residential area and so on. So first we look at land cover, which is a broad classification of the different features that are available on the land surfaces. For example, is it built up area or is it forest area and so on, and then further classification of the built up area using land use classifications, we can even further classify that land. So once we have land cover data with us, then using land suitability analysis, we can formulate what sort of land use is suitable for a particular land area. So land suitability analysis helps us to decide what sort of land use is suitable for a particular area with a particular kind of land cover now. For example, if an area is having a lot of productive agriculture, it's not useful to put residential or other kind of land use over there, or rather we will try to provide the residential land use in another area if there is enough space available. So when we talk about land use and land cover maps, and whenever we are talking about development plans, we require both land use and land cover maps for preparation of development, not only the development plan but also the final land use maps or the final maps that we prepare for that urban area. And we can use both remote sensing and geographical information systems, GIS systems, to develop this kind of maps. So first, whenever we have to prepare a development plan, we need to prepare a base map, and we use both land use maps and land cover maps for previous years to prepare the base map. And once base map is prepared, we prepare an existing land use plan where we show that, okay, This is the percentages of land use in the particular, in each particular category of land uses, based on both ground truth and based on both remote sensing data. And finally, we have got finally, based on the existing land use and the way we are going to develop an urban area, we will also have a proposed land use plan at the future. What kind of data we can use? There is a lot of free data available. For example, we have Bhuvan land use sheets, which is available from our Government of India, and Bhuvan data contains land use data, land cover data, administrative boundaries data, infrastructure data, water bodies, watershed boundaries, and so on, soil resources. And similarly, we also have, and this is a more recent data set that is available with us, we also have this National Urban Information System database, which contains both this map data as well as attribute or a database as well along with that. For example, we have got both thematic data and attribute data. In thematic data, we have again land use, land cover map. The scale is also different. Physiography map, geomorphology, geological structures, lithology maps, soil maps, drainage maps, and so on. And in administrative data, we have got administrative boundaries, forest boundaries, settlement names, and so on. So both these databases could be used for preparation of our development plans. And along with that, if I want to do more specialized studies, for example, how green cover is depleting over a period of time, I can use other data sets as well. For example, we can look into satellite imagery data from ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization, and we can also use these maps for preparation of land use and land cover maps for a particular urban area, and also eventually preparing development plans. So this is an example of a land cover map for the state of West Bengal. The source is given over here. You can see the source. So in this map, you can see that we have got built up area, which is you can see urban, rural, then there is mining, and then there is agricultural land like cropland, agricultural plantations, fallow land, current shifting cultivation land for that. And then we have forest, different kinds of forest. We have grasslands, we have got barren lands, we have got wetlands. So this is the land cover map of West Bengal, which we have obtained from Bhuvan data sheets. And then we also have got a land use map for Kharagpur town in West Bengal, India. And you can see here we are focusing only on the built up area, and we are showing roads, rail, drainage, residential areas, commercial areas, industrial areas, mixed use areas, and so on. So both these data sets are available. The internet addresses are given over here. You can explore the other maps for your own area or your own city, and that would actually help you to understand both the land use and land cover of the areas where you reside. So when we talk about land use, what are the different kinds of land use? The town planning guidelines actually has specified 10 broad land uses and around 40 subcategories of those land uses. You can see in the table, in the slide, you can see there is residential land use, there is commercial land use, there is industrial land use, and within residential land use, you can see there are primary residential zones, then there are unplanned or informal residential zones, and then we have commercial. Within commercial, we have got retail shopping zone, general business and commercial district centers, wholesale godowns, warehousing, regulated markets, and so on. So similarly, in industry, we have got service and light industry, we have extensive and heavy industry, and so on. So these are the different categories of land uses that are there, and usually an urban built area or built up area in urban local bodies could be divided into this sort of land uses, and we need this division so that we can segregate the different activities. But at the same time, there could be also mixed land uses where we can have mixed industrial use zones, we can have mixed residential zones, we have got mixed commercial zones. So this is also possible. So we have got around 42 land use categories which we can use, and then there are 10 broad categories which could be done at the perspective plan level. So that means we don't have to, at the perspective plan level, when we prepare our plans, we can we can only consider this, broad areas of residential or industrial and so on. But when we prepare master plans or development plans, we have to prepare land uses of each of these 42 land use categories. Or when we have to propose, we have to reserve lands for future purposes or future growth of the city, then we have to reserve land for these 42 land use category types. So then once the plan is prepared, once a land use plan is prepared, it is not absolute, and obviously based on certain requirements that arise over time, the authorities or government bodies, they can also allow certain changes in the land use which could be taken care of by spot zoning. That means we can either change or relax certain land use in a broader area which is already finalized in a development plan, and we can we can change this for smaller areas, but changing big areas probably is not required, or rather is not suitable for a particular development plan. And so when we do a development plan exercise, when we specify that okay, we will have a residential area, there are certain kinds of activities which are permitted in that area. There are certain kinds of activities which are restricted in that area. Means we can allow in certain cases, or certain varieties of those could be allowed. And then there are certain prohibited activities. For example, in an urban area which is designated as a residential land use, we can also have some amount of commercial areas where local shopping could be shopping could take place. Similarly, we can also allow certain amount of home-based offices to operate from certain residential areas. So these are permitted categories. Restricted categories means we can have certain amount of schools and institutions, but they could be limited or small in sizes. And then there are certain categories, or they have to be, or certain kinds of some amount of not only institutions but maybe some form of industry. If it's small, it is not creating much problem, or we can do a case by case check and then allow that industry to come over here, but or to be set up in that particular area. But there are certain activities which are prohibited. For example, we cannot have an oil refinery in a residential zone, so this is a prohibited activity. So that means there is no absolute rule to say that this activity is not permitted or this activity would not be allowed in a particular land use category. So there are overlaps, of course, and that is up to the discretion of the local planning body to decide what activities should be permitted in a particular land use area, or a particular area which has been designated with a particular land use. So this that means there are this is, so once the development plan is prepared, it acts as a guideline. And it is not a document which has to be, which is very strictly adhered to. So it is adhered to the best possible extent, but there are certain changes which takes place, and that means the urban area continuously goes through transformation, and eventually when the next development plan takes place, we update the land use to include these changes that has been allowed in certain certain instances that has taken place. So then, when we talk about, after we talk about land use, then we talk about the different, so this land use categories actually, as you can see that in this land use categories, we have got different kinds of land use, and each requires different kind of transportation to support that land use. For example, if you have industry and you have residential, you require transportation to connect between residential and industrial land uses. So similarly, whenever we are, so the land use classification actually has got an impact on the kind of land use transport integration that will be taken up in an urban area, or what kind of integration is possible in an urban area. So similarly, whenever we are looking at urban settlements are of different sizes, and the size of urban settlements determine what kind of land use should be there, what should be the not only the what categories of land use should be allowed inside, or what should be the percentages of those land use, but what would be the predominant land use. All these things are depends on, some amount of it depends on the size of the town, sometimes it depends on the context or what has been the historical context of that town. If it's a town which is mostly contains a historical central core and lot of areas which are are archaeological sites, or very nice buildings which has been preserved, then it has got a different flavor. So we will plan that town in a different way. So both the size and the type of town plays a role in how the plans needs to be developed or how the land use categories needs to be designed for that particular town. But first of all, we should understand what kind of towns are there, and in Census of India has defined different categories of towns. And first of all, urban settlements as defined by Census of India are areas where the minimum population size is around 5,000, and then it has got 75% of the population would be not doing engaged in agriculture, and they are doing non-agricultural work, and also the population density should be more than 400 persons per square kilometer. So these are the criteria based on which urban settlements have been, or areas have been defined as urban settlements. And we have different kinds of urban settlements depending on size. For example, we have small towns starting from 5,000 to 20,000 population range, and these are again managed by a municipal council. Then we have got medium towns, which is from 50,000 to 1 lakh, or there are medium towns of second category, which is 1 lakh to 5 lakh, and they are governed by a municipal council. And then there are large cities starting from 5 lakh, and then it could be something like a megapolis, where it could be of even more than 1 crore, and these are managed by a municipal corporation. So not only the authority which prepares manages that particular area is different, so the kind of urban plans that are developed could be of different kind. And when we talk about urban plans, the land use and the kind of transportation systems that we plan for these cities are also different. For example, in a small town, we may not plan for transit corridors, because we know that in small towns it may not be feasible to set up a BRT system or to set up a heavy rail system, but in a small town probably it would be supported by mostly walking, bicycling, and maybe to some extent paratransit. So the transportation system is different, the land use structure could be different, and even the governing systems would be different. So that results in different kinds of development plans for different kinds of towns. So when we talk about land use structure, that basically is this is just a guideline which actually tells us that what kind of land use, what amount of land use should be there in a particular town. As I was discussing during the last slide, that depending on the town, we decide on what kind of land use categorization we will do, or what kind of what amount of land we will allocate to different kinds of land use. But this actually gives us an idea about that what amount of land we should reserve for different kinds of land use, and when we are preparing a plan. For example, in residential land use category, for small towns it is almost 50%. Whereas in a large metropolitan city, it is only to the extent of around 35-36%. So there is huge difference between a small city and a metropolitan city. The reason, because metropolitan cities has got different kinds of activities happening in that. For example, in a metropolitan cities, we see that there is the commercial area is relatively more compared to a small city. The industrial area, it could be more, it could be less, but in certain, of course, public and semi-public and recreational areas, public and semi-public area means there are a lot of institutions in a big city which are missing in a small city. So accordingly, the land use structure is also different in these different cities. And then when we are designing the land use structure of an urban area, we also have to consider the historical background of the city, or how the city has grown, and there we have seen that when we were discussing last time that if the inner city area is very dense, you cannot change land use in that particular area. But what we will do is, when we plan for the surrounding area or new area which would be taken up for development, there we will adopt this percentage, or we will try to adopt this kind of land use breakup in those new areas, whereas the old areas will remain as it is, or we will try to improve that, but it is difficult because already this has been built up, and usually population density in these core areas are much higher than the periphery. So for new plans, we will try to adopt this land use structure or these guidelines for the new areas that we are going to develop, not for the old areas. So next, I will discuss on 4 concepts which are actually which plays a role in determining the form of an urban area or the structure of an urban area, and this is very, very important when we consider land use and transportation planning for an urban area. For example, this population density, the carrying capacity, and then we have also got the floor area index and the ground coverage, which is, these 4 characteristics of an urban area influences urban form, and this also could be controlled to determine the structure of an urban area. For example, population density and carrying capacity, these are almost synonymous. For example, there are guidelines. For example, when we increase population in an area, it actually increases the pressure in that area. For example, the roads become congested, people may not get enough adequate space to live, the infrastructure may not be able to support so many people, the urban services of solid waste collection and all these things may not be able to support so many people living in a very small area. So there are optimum densities which are again guidelines which are given in the URDPFI guidelines. You can consult that, or you can form your own guidelines for deciding on what kind of density is ideal for your urban area based on other considerations. And usually we say that for small towns, the density is somewhere around 75 to 125 persons per hectare, whereas for large towns it should be around 125 to 175 people per hectare, and whereas for megalopolis it could be even higher. So this kind of densities, and again when you look into hilly areas, the density would be even lesser than the plain areas. So this is the density which is suitable for developing a particular urban area. Can we develop more compact areas? Yes, we can, but provided we give infrastructure and other kind of support facilities for those particular areas. But normal areas with standard infrastructure and standard urban structure that we have discussed in the previously, there it is better to stick to this kind of densities. And when we talk about density, it could be density based on it could be population density, it could be based on the number of residential areas, or it could be based on the number of houses per acre, it could be based on number of habitable rooms per acre, and so on. So along with density, there is another concept which is called floor space index, which can also help us in determining what kind of density is what kind of density a developed area results in. For example, if we increase the floor space index for a particular area, what it means is we can construct more amount of buildings for a particular plot of land. So when we increase number of the total number the building the constructed amount of square footage for a particular plot of land, obviously we can have more number of families residing in those particular buildings. So that leads to more residential density. So we can control urban residential densities, and controlling urban density can result in changing the form or the structure of an urban area, and this is also impacts the transportation and the land use of that particular area. So for residential areas, we can use both residential density or floor area density for a particular area. But for commercial, non-residential areas or commercial areas, the measures that we can use is built up area per acre or the floor space index for that particular area. So the concept of in the concept of carrying capacity, it's almost similar to density, but the only difference is in this particular concept, we can say that we define the maximum number of people that could be supported in a particular area. So when we say this is the maximum limit a particular area can hold, it is based on multiple criteria. And it could be based on the desired levels of congestion in that particular area. It could be based on the infrastructure capacity. It could be based on the institutional capacity. It could be based on environmental capacity, or it could be based on the sustainable, levels of, number of people that could be stay in a particular area. But what it also means is, if any one of these fails, you may say that, well, we will stick to the limit. Like for example, the amount of water supply. If the capacity of water supply is limited, we cannot have more number of people even though other capacities are available. For example, the roads are wide in this area. It may support a lot of people, lot of vehicles moving in that particular road, but actually it doesn't help. So we have to stick to the one which is failing. That means if water supply is not there, the capacity limit is decided by the one which is the most vulnerable among all this. So this is the concept of carrying capacity. And then we have the concept of, we already discussed, floor space index and the concept of ground coverage. So these are another two tools using which we can control the development of, or rather the structure and the urban form. The density and to FSI to some, or FAR or FSI to some extent, could be said as part of the urban planning guidelines. But whereas FSI and ground coverage is more or less part of municipal bylaws. That means municipal corporations decide what is the available floor area ratio or FSI for a particular area, and it can also decide on what is the ground coverage for a particular building or a particular plot of land. So FSI is defined as the ratio between total covered floor area, that is built up area, to the plot area of the building, and it is an indicator of built up area per acre based on FAR consumed. That means even though FAR is high, it may not have been consumed. That means the entire FAR may not have been utilized. So that is a determinant of how much density is there in a particular area. And FAR for a particular area is set by the set by the municipal corporation, considering multiple factors, which could be like width of a street. That means if the street is not that wide, we cannot allow construction of a very high rise building, or rather we cannot give very high FAR. And then it has to consider the present, and not only present, the future traffic load in that particular street needs to be considered, because if I give higher FAR, then probably we may end up with a shopping mall in that particular street, and that road may not be able to take the resulting transportation traffic load that is arising because of the presence of the shopping mall. Then it could be depending on the parking availability. For example, it's a residential area, there is no parking available, the streets are very thin, and then if I give higher FAR, it may result in more number of people coming there, and then they will require cars, and that needs to be parked, and that parking space is not available. Similarly, we can look at land use and the locality, and how the locality is organized. We can look into the utilities and infrastructure that is available, the existing population density that is there, the type of buildings that are there, the kind of firefighting services. All this determine what kind of FAR could be set for a particular area. And using different values of FAR, we can decide on the urban structure and form. So that means if we want to go for transit-oriented development, we want to increase the FAR of the area surrounding our transit node. In that case, we also have to ensure that the area has got with wide streets, it has got parking, it has got different sorts of land use categorized, it has got infrastructure supporting this kind of intense development. So After FAR, the second tool that municipal authorities have to decide on the urban form or the urban structure is setbacks. So in residential areas or in certain plots, we have setbacks, which actually means that okay, certain amount of land has to be left for the building. That means from the edge of the plot to the building's edge, there has to be certain amount of land which has to be reserved, which has to be kept open, which has to be open to sky, and it has to be open to sky. So this setback is again decided based on the building height, the road width, the plot size, fire safety requirements, because if I don't allow this setback, then a fire tender cannot get inside two buildings. So these are the challenges that has to be overcome, and accordingly municipal authorities decide on setbacks. But when I decide on a setback, that means that if the setbacks are too high, that means we are only allowing a small part of the plot to be built, and that will result in a tall building compared to a large, a small building. So whenever if the FAR is low, then the building would be small, but if the FAR is high, then it will become a tall building because the setback is high. So that is how also you can create you can control the urban structure and the urban form. But in case of gated communities and plotted developments where we have a large plot with multiple buildings in that, we cannot have setbacks. But here we set ground coverage standards, which means certain percentage of the ground should be left empty. So this is how, these are the different tools a municipality can use, or even an urban planner can use to decide on the urban structure, and eventually this actually influence the land use and transport interaction in an urban area. So you can see this document from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, Urban and URDPFI guidelines. This could be you can consult that as a reference for this particular lecture, and it will show you the different tools and techniques available with municipal and urban planners to control the urban land use and the urban form for a particular urban local body. And to conclude this particular lecture, we can say land cover and land use structure of an area influences urban form and the travel demand characteristics of that particular area, and urban form on the other hand can be influenced through changing urban density and municipal bylaws. Thank you.